Thanks for joining us. This is Hart Williams from Cloud Capital. We're a wealth management firm, and joining me today is Ryan Hemmert from Washington Business Brokers. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and the firm?
Yeah, hey, good morning, Hart. Excited to talk today. So I am a business broker and M&A advisor. I'm the founder of Washington Business Brokers here in Seattle. We represent businesses with revenue from about 2 million up to about 20 million in revenue. They span all industry types. The process of selling a business is fairly similar, irrespective of the industry that a business may be in. And then prior to being in the M&A space here in the last several years, I worked in corporate America, right, for a number of large companies, including Amazon, Deloitte Consulting, Liberty Mutual, and Safeco Insurance.
Okay, Ryan, the big question is now a good time to sell a business?
Yes, provided. So I say, like, in terms of timing for your business, there's three things that have to be in alignment. First, like you personally as the owner have to be committed to the process. One, because it's going to take time, right? And two, you don't want to scare away a buyer by being unsure about moving forward with the process. So that's the first thing. It's an emotional decision, right? And a personal decision for you and perhaps your loved ones too. Second thing is the business needs to be um, at the right time. And so, what do I mean by that? So, for example, your sales, right, and cash flow trends need to be steady, not necessarily growing, but you're going to be in a much better position and have a much more fun time through the sale process if the sales and cash flow are steady, right? Or even better, if one or both of those trends are growing, right? And then um, the third dial there, so to speak, is the market receptive to your business? And so, for example, the market would not be receptive to trying to sell a large hotel, right, or a restaurant in April of 2020. And there are similar types of businesses like it's a market, right? It's seasonal in terms of which industries are in flavor and which are not. So, provided we're not up against a headwind like that and your cash flow trends are pretty steady, then yes, it's an excellent time to take a business to market.
At Cloud, we focus a lot on growing wealth for clients, usually post-transaction, but we do have a lot of clients that are getting closer to the idea of selling their business, and they might be 12, 18, 24, 36 months out today.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give somebody that is on a little bit longer time horizon, but the idea of selling their business is certainly prevalent right now?
Yeah, great question. So first thing I would say here is, keep in mind selling a business is a document and data-driven process. And the conversation with any buyer is going to start by looking at your financials. So what does the P&L, what does the balance sheet, right? A lot of business owners have no idea what some of the line items are on their balance sheet when we start to ask questions about those, but those are important and come up quickly in a business sale. Also, how closely does your 1120, so your business filings for IRS filings, for the entity, match the P&L? And so, for example, I've seen a P&L for a business of a $10 million revenue business where it shows $1 million in profitability. Then I look at the tax return and I see that it's break even. Right. And so that $1 million difference between the P&L profitability and the profitability on the 1120, the IRS, of course, we can show an adjusted statement, and we always do that. But if the difference between those is too substantial, it tends to raise or invite more questions from buyers. And so, in essence, I'd say, clean up financials. Also, you want to pay more tax, right? So every business owner in America is incentivized to reduce the income, that they report to the IRS, so they pay lower tax. We all do it. I do it too, right? It's a benefit of being a business owner. However, as you approach the business sale process, the thinking really shifts, right? And you want to, a year out, 2 years out, you want to go ahead and report $1 million in operating income and importantly pay tax on the operating income, because then somebody who's sharp and knows what they're doing can draw in buyers, right? And we can get you 6 times, seven, 8 times that $1 million in income that you're paying tax on.
So we focus a lot on economic happenings because we're trying to understand where we sit in the cycle so we can
Yep.
better position our clients for growth and protective assets, things like that. Lately, we've seen a lot of talk about inflation, about raising interest rates, about economic slowing. We've seen layoffs, all of those types of things. How are those impacting your work and the clients that you're serving?
Yep. The inflation impact is real and quickly noticeable when you start to look at the financials for a business. A lot of business owners will say to me, "Well, Ryan, our revenue in 2022 or 2023 year to date is up 7% over last year. We're having a great year." And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, well, inflation last quarter was 9.1%. So, yes, of course your revenue should be up 7%, right? You're basically just staying constant from a unit sales or product sales standpoint. So that's the first thing. So I see that revenue is holding up okay because we're in an inflationary environment. Buyers, however, are going to get out a microscope and look at cash flow, right? And here's where I really see inflation issues. And so small businesses, at the 2 million, 10 million in revenue standpoint, they're not keeping up with their pricing and they're not as dynamic and strategic there. And so that's reflected in the profitability of the business. So a lot of businesses will be up 10% year over year on sales currently. But then when we look at their cash flow, they might be off 30%, right? Or even, goodness, 50%. Every input cost for them. One business owner, she had to increase all of her hourly workers' pay by a third, right? By a third to keep them, right? Because her workers told, I mean, like that sort of thing. So like, we're not talking about a 5% increase in labor for some of these business owners. Your question about layoffs and things like that, I think there's a couple, it's clear to all of us now, there's a couple economies going on in our country, right? Like it's that large that we have these micro economies. In small to medium businesses, the concern is keeping or retaining your employees. I'm about to meet a business owner in 2 hours. He's got 20 employees. 13 of them are technicians that service semis and fleets, like fleets of trucks, like corporate fleets. And his biggest inhibitor to growth is hiring more quality mechanics, right? And so, he's very mindful of what he's paying them, what those mechanics could get at another place.
When you are working with clients as they're preparing for a transaction, how important is it that they have other qualified advisors around them?
Yeah, really good question. I would say very important, with a little caveat at different parts of the process, right? And so the thing to keep in mind is, sometimes a seller or a buyer will ask me, should I go ahead and get an attorney now? Should I get a CPA now? And sometimes, so I'll always say that's a prudent thing to do, and of course it is. But sometimes I'll say not yet, right? Like yes, it's wait a month, wait till we have a letter of intent, the terms of a deal agreed upon, right? Because in some cases, some of the Seattle attorneys and firms and things like that, like the fees can add up kind of quickly on an hourly basis. So there's that. A smart tax advisor, right? And there's a number of tax experts, Hart, that you and I know in the community, right? That I recommend that sellers talk to before we start the sale process. And then a financial wealth planning firm, right? Has a lot of times has creative ideas about how we can even structure the sale before we get into the sale process to reduce the tax liability. So yeah, I mean, you're going to work with a number of different stakeholders at different parts of the process, and a smart owner already knows who most of those players are going to be before we get into the sale process. They might need someone like myself to make a couple referrals for an M&A attorney or something like that, someone that they normally don't interact with.
Yeah, the one ad I put on that list is a trust and estate attorney because we
Okay.
have
Yep.
looked at sales before, and at certain levels, it can be very advantageous to have various different estate structures, but
Yep.
those need to be done well in advance of the actual transaction.
There's two like industry conferences that I go to each year, and there's a firm that always speaks at these things, and it's perhaps the most well attended workshop, and it's a firm based out of Illinois, and the folks from that firm have their JDs, and they're all CPAs, and they all have a real estate license, and so they are at the intersection of financial like deal structuring, tax minimization, and legal papering of deals. And so a lot of times for a seller of a business of a certain size, I will insist that they, talk to that firm for at least an hour, who can give them a lot of times some very valuable ideas about how to save money.
What do you see as a commonality between the clients that have really great results in a transaction?
For those clients that have the best results and where they enjoy the sale process the most, they are not the business, right? They're working on the business, not in the business. Okay. And so last year I had a business owner and he told me that he liked to provide the initial quote or estimate for all jobs. And these would be, these could be up to a $500,000 job. And he felt it was important that he was the face to give a quote type thing or an estimate. And that was a little concerning, right? And that he was making that initial impression with every client of that business. So I think the wisest owners have a strong team right under them and perhaps making a majority of the day-to-day decisions so that the owner can be, kind of outward looking, studying the market, studying competition, studying profitability of different service lines and those sorts of things. So that would be one trait. I think the other is again, you have to be ready. And it's kind of like before you would take a house to market. There are certain things we would all do before we would put our house up for sale in any real estate market. And it's similar with a business, right? And so there's a little bit of preparation and sometimes unfortunately I'm approached by an owner or a family or an advisor and there's a health issue, right? I'm helping an owner now and has got a very sick parent, right? So she doesn't have the time to devote to the business. So sometimes there's something like that. Helping another owner right now, divorce situation, and they need to sell the business. So they spent no time prepping it for sale. So sometimes some of those things come up.
Just on the nuts and bolts side of things, how long does it take to sell a business? When should someone engage your service? How often are clients talking with you, or how far ahead of making a meaningful commitment are they talking to you? And what's the best way to find you and get in touch?
Sure. Thank you. The shortest sale I have had in the last several years has been 4 months, and that's 4 months from the time we said, "Okay, let's work together. Let's start this process." We sign an engagement agreement to closing day. So shortest I've had is 4 months. The longest I've had has been a year, right? And the year was an unusual situation because a buyer fell through a couple months into it, so we basically had to go back to other buyers. What I say on this timeline question is I advise people like 6 to 9 months. Is my stock reply to that? It depends greatly on your industry, on the size, and on the location of the business. If your business is out in Yakima or something like that, there's just less people in that community to buy it, right, or to run it. And so, if you're closer to a major urban area or something like that where there's jobs or roles for a partner, then that can make things a lot easier, right? It also just draws in more people in that community. And then in terms of how people can get in touch with me, there's a lot of information on our website. It's WA Business Brokers with an S.com. So Washington Business Brokers. And then it's got our email, office numbers and all that fun stuff on there too. And we've got lots of, I think we're up to 20 videos online and dozens of blog posts and a lot of resources we try to put out there for owners, just like you're doing.
And what does it cost to sell a business?
Yeah, no, it's a great question on fees. Like, how do I get paid? So I work on a success fee basis, right? So think of it as a commission basis. I do not charge a seller any fee until we get to the closing table together. Okay, until we get to closing day. Some of the other firms in town will charge a monthly retainer, right? And that retainer could vary, right? That retainer will often vary based on the size of the business. And so an example here would be that retainer could be as low as $2,000 a month, could be as high as $25,000 a month, right? Depending on the size of the business. And then the sum of that retainer would get credited from the percentage fee at the closing table. And so there's a lot of firms that employ that model. And then an owner might be wondering, well, what happens if that firm doesn't sell my business after 9 months and I've been paying $10,000 a month, right? Well, in that case, and in most of those cases, most of those firms, that fee is non-refundable. And from their perspective, it can be fair, right? There are very real marketing costs. I think we're up on 6 online platforms, right? All of them, all of those cost money to maintain that online exposure and fun stuff like that. And there's real costs for designers and all those things. So, no one's going into it. Those firms aren't going into it for the retainer, right? It's just basically to cover some of their overhead because the process can take some time. And then on the percentage fee, in general, like that can vary, of course, depending on the size. If your business is valued at $1 million, you could expect to pay a 10 to 12% fee on that transaction. I would say that would be That would be normal as you would talk to different advisors, right? I think they would all be within that range. Let's say your business is valued at $5 million, right, or $10 million, and that fee is going to start to go down pretty quickly from the 10%, right? So, or from the 10 to 12%, and so it's a sliding downward scale. And the commitment that I like to make, right, with a no retainer here is to tell an owner, hey, we're going to do this together, and I don't want to work with an owner unless they have a quality business, right? That's how my partner is as well. So it's kind of a commitment and a show of confidence in the process ourselves.
That's great. Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah.
What happens when a sale doesn't go through?
Yeah. You mean when a party, like a deal has been negotiated, but it doesn't get completed for one reason or another?
Yeah, I've heard of some of that happening recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does happen. I've got a divorce situation right now that has paused a deal, for one business. There could be a variety of reasons, right? Perhaps a buyer's financing doesn't come through. A buyer, maybe their financing came through, but the buyer got cold feet. Maybe it's a first-time business owner or something like that. So that can happen. In those cases when a deal doesn't get consummated for one reason or another, it kind of depends on, in terms of what happened next. What happens next? I would say that that's largely dependent upon which party, right, force the deal to kind of stall. And if it's the buyer, right, then in a lot of cases, the seller's going to want to continue the process, right? Someone like myself would immediately go and re-engage other buyers, right? And so even when I have a business under contract, the business will still be marketed online on all of those online platforms all over the internet type thing. And we'll always reply to each buyer and just say, hey, we have a buyer for this business. It's under contract. If things change, we will reach out to you. And guess what? I always tell people, like, still submit your info, because already I've sold a business to one of those buyers, right, that reached out after a business was under contract. So you absolutely want to do that, because things can and do change. It's business.
Okay, Ryan, thank you so much for your insight. Everyone, this is Ryan Hemmert, Washington Business Brokers. Ryan, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you should they have more questions?
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of information, resources, and of course, our contact info on our website. Website is WA for Washington, WA Business Brokers with an S.com. So WABusinessBrokers.com. Great deal of information and resources out there. If you search for us on Google or YouTube, you're going to find all sorts of content that we put out into the universe.
That's wonderful. And again, I'm Hart Williams from Cloud Capital. Thank you for joining us.